I am Caroline Hayes, 35 years old. And when I married Ethan Marshall, I thought my life was complete. He slipped a $1 billion diamond ring onto my finger, the Solara stone, and the world called it the most expensive symbol of love in America. But I never imagined that same ring would turn my husband and my own sister against me. I still hear Madeline's whisper the night she tore it from my hand on the deck of our yacht. "Say hello to the sharks," she breathed as they pushed me into the black Pacific. They thought I would never come back. What happened next will make you question what family and love really mean. Stay with me, because you will want to hear how this story ends. But before I tell you how I survived, you need to understand how it all began. I was 35 years old when I thought I finally had everything I had worked for, growing up in Seattle with my head always buried in books and lines of code. I never imagined that one day I would stand on a stage in Palo Alto announcing the sale of my company for nearly $900 million. Neuropulse was my creation, a startup I had begun in a cramped apartment after finishing my computer science degree at Stanford. I poured every sleepless night into it. Every ounce of energy. Every idea that people once dismissed as unrealistic. When TechSphere Global acquired it in 2022, the reporters called me the quiet genius from Washington who had built an empire out of algorithms that could read human emotion. I simply felt exhausted but grateful that all the sacrifices had meant something. In the midst of this whirlwind of success, I met Ethan Marshall. He was 39. A venture capitalist with that polished California charm I had only seen in movies. He knew how to make everyone feel like they were the most interesting person in the room. And when he turned that attention on me, I was caught off guard. For years, my life had been about product launches and coding sprints, not candlelit dinners or champagne toasts. Ethan changed that. He showed up at every conference I attended, asked thoughtful questions about my work, sent flowers to my office without a note, so I would wonder. And eventually, he asked me to dinner at a quiet restaurant in San Francisco. From that first dinner, it was like a current, pulling me forward. We talked for hours. Not just about technology or finance, but about books, travel, the future. He told me he admired how I had built everything myself. When he kissed me outside the restaurant, I felt something I had denied myself for years. A rush of hope that maybe I could have both success and love. Within 8 months, we were planning a wedding. The ceremony was small, held on the cliffs near Carmel, with the Pacific stretching endlessly behind us. The wind carried the sound of the waves as I walked down the aisle, my father's arm steady beside me. Ethan looked at me with that confident smile that made me believe he would never let me fall. When he slid the ring onto my finger, I remember the collective gasp from the guests. It was not just any ring. It was a diamond of legendary provenance, once part of a European royal collection. Known as the Solara stone, the gem had been insured for $1 billion and was registered with international authorities as a cultural treasure. Ethan had presented it to me the night he proposed, saying he wanted me to wear a symbol as rare as my mind. I should have been worried that something so valuable could paint a target on my back. But in that moment, all I felt was wonder. The ring caught the sunlight and scattered it into 1,000 sparks, each one reflected in the eyes of the people watching. Reporters later wrote about it, calling our wedding a union of love and power. The tech genius and the financier, crowned with the most expensive engagement ring in America. To me, it was simply Ethan's promise. Heavy on my finger but warm with meaning. Standing beside me as maid of honor was my younger sister, Madeline. She was 32, 3 years behind me. And for most of our lives, she had been the golden child of the family. Blonde, outgoing, once a model with dreams of Los Angeles runways. She had collected admirers the way I collected lines of code. But her career had fizzled. Her rent had often been paid by me. And our parents still treated her like the baby who deserved protecting. I did not mind helping her. She was my sister. That day, however, as the vows were spoken and the ring sparkled, I noticed something in her expression I could not ignore. When Ethan lifted my hand to seal the moment, Madeline's eyes locked onto the diamond with a hunger I had never seen before. She smiled for the cameras, but her gaze lingered too long. For a second, I thought I saw resentment flicker behind her tears of joy. Later at the reception, she hugged me tightly, her perfume sweet and familiar, and whispered in my ear that she was so happy for me. I smiled and held her back, but my mind replayed that look she had given the ring. It was not admiration, it was possession. I brushed the thought away that night, convincing myself I was being paranoid. That every sister feels a twinge of envy at a wedding. The champagne, the music, the congratulations from strangers blurred together. Ethan and I danced under string lights, his hands steady on my back, and the ring gleamed between us, as if sealing the promise of a future that nothing could shatter. What I did not know was that the same jewel which symbolized love in that moment would one day become the reason my husband and my sister plotted my death. And the memory of Madeline's eyes on that diamond would return to me, like a warning I had failed to hear. My parents, Gloria and Robert Hayes, were both retired high school teachers who had always carried themselves with quiet dignity. But when it came to their daughters, the balance was never equal. From as early as I could remember, the spotlight had been cast on Madeline. She was the pretty one, the charming one, the child who could bring a room to life just by walking into it. I, on the other hand, was the quiet achiever, the girl praised only when the report card had straight A's or when my science project won another ribbon. I do not think they meant to make me feel like less. Parents rarely do, but when Madeline forgot her homework, there was always a soft laugh and a comment that her creativity mattered more. When I brought home a trophy, there was a pat on the shoulder and a reminder not to brag. It became the rhythm of our household. Madeline basking in approval, and me working tirelessly for scraps of recognition. By the time I was in middle school, I understood the rules. Madeline's mistakes were forgivable. Mine were lessons in responsibility. If she skipped practice, it was because she was finding herself. If I dared to miss one, it was a disappointment. I buried myself deeper into computers, into the glow of the monitor that never judged me, into the logic that never favored beauty over effort. The divide followed us into adulthood. Madeline left for Los Angeles, chasing a modeling career, and I stayed behind, finishing my degree, coding until my eyes burned. Her calls came every few weeks, her voice trembling as she told me she could not pay rent, or her car had broken down, or an agency had promised her the world and delivered nothing. Each time I wired money, telling myself she just needed one more chance. There was a night I will never forget when she called crying from the back of a taxi. She said she had nowhere to go, that her landlord had locked her out. I paid her deposit for a new place without hesitation. My savings were already thin from building my startup, but I told myself it was my duty. Family takes care of family, even when it is one-sided. When I finally made it, when Neuropulse grew large enough to attract serious investors, my parents told everyone how proud they were of me. Yet even in those conversations, they managed to remind me how worried they were about Madeline, how she was still searching for her path. I would listen, swallowing the sting, and send her another check. At my wedding, their favoritism took a quieter form. I could hear my mother whisper to one of her friends how radiant Madeline looked as maid of honor, as if the day were partly about her too. My father fussed over whether Madeline had eaten, whether her shoes were comfortable, all while I adjusted my own veil in silence. I smiled through it, reminding myself the day was about love, not old wounds. During the reception, Madeline held my hand tightly. She leaned in close, her eyes fixed not on me but on the diamond blazing at my finger. The music thudded around us. Guests laughed and clinked glasses, but her words slid into my ear sharp and deliberate. She said she would die for a thing like this. Her lips curved into a half-smile that did not reach her eyes. I pulled back, searching her face. Maybe she meant it as a joke, a throwaway line born of champagne and envy. Yet the way she held my hand, her nails pressing lightly into my skin, told a different story. There was a hunger there, a craving I had never seen directed at me before. I tried to shake it off, telling myself not to read too much into a careless remark. Families say strange things when emotions run high. But later, When Ethan spun me around the dance floor, and the chandeliers reflected the diamond's fire across the room, I caught Madeline watching again. She was not smiling. Her expression was taut. Her jaw set. Her gaze locked on the stone like it was the only thing that mattered. After the wedding, she stayed close. She insisted on helping me pack for our honeymoon, lingered in my dressing room while I changed, asked questions about the ring, its weight, its history, its insurance. At first, I answered lightly, amused by her curiosity. But then her questions turned specific. She wanted to know if the stone could ever be replaced, if the registry made it impossible to sell, how often I wore it. I remember laughing it off and saying she sounded like a jeweler more than a sister. She just shrugged and smiled, but her eyes did not soften. My parents did not notice. They never did. To them, Madeline was still the little girl who could do no wrong. When I later mentioned, she seemed fascinated by the ring. My mother waved it away, saying every woman admired beautiful jewelry. My father chuckled, calling it sibling rivalry. Nothing serious? I wanted to believe them. But the words she had whispered on my wedding day kept echoing. Emphasis on would die. It was the way she said it. Not light or playful, but solemn, almost reverent. Like a vow. Over the following months, I sent her money again and again. She said modeling was drying up, that the agencies had moved on to younger faces, that she was considering a career change. I suggested she go back to school, offered to pay her tuition. But she scoffed at the idea. She said people like me could bury themselves in books. But she was meant to live in the spotlight. She just needed one more break. I listened, as I always had. And I wired the funds. Each transaction felt heavier than the last. A mix of guilt and obligation pressing on me. The ring sparkled on my finger through it all. A constant reminder of the imbalance that had defined our lives. Looking back now, I see that moment at the reception with clarity. Madeline's whisper was not a careless remark. It was a warning, a glimpse into a mind already consumed by envy. It was the seed of something darker, something that would grow until it threatened to destroy me completely. In the months after the wedding, Ethan was attentive and affectionate in ways I had never experienced before. He planned spontaneous weekend trips to Napa, sent flowers to my office in Palo Alto, and always seemed to know when I needed a hand on my back to steady me. For a while, I let myself believe I had finally found the balance I had been chasing, the union of work and love. But after TechSphere finalized the acquisition and the last wire transfer cleared, I began to notice small cracks forming in the life we had built. At first it was subtle. Ethan's phone, which used to sit face up on the table, now stayed locked with a passcode. I did not know. He started taking calls in another room, his voice dropping low, the kind of tone that suggested secrets. I brushed it aside, telling myself it was business, that venture capital deals required discretion. Yet the late nights stretched into early mornings, and the trips labeled as conferences came, without details or agendas. He still smiled at me, still kissed my forehead before leaving. But the warmth in his touch cooled with each passing week. I would reach for his hand and find it already occupied with his phone. I would ask about his meetings and hear vague replies that ended the conversation before it started. The man who once made me feel like the center of his world now seemed to orbit elsewhere. It might have been easier to endure if not for the way Madeline began appearing more often. She started visiting the house in Newport Beach under the guise of looking for a fresh start. She said Los Angeles was wearing her down, that she needed a break. I told myself she was family, that giving her a guest room was harmless. But soon her presence grew heavier. She lingered in the kitchen in the mornings with Ethan, their laughter spilling out before I entered. She accompanied him on errands, claiming she needed advice on investments. One evening, I came home early from a strategy dinner with former colleagues. The house was quiet except for the faint hum of voices down the hall. I followed the sound to Ethan's office and found the door half closed. Through the crack, I saw Ethan and Madeline hunched over his laptop, the screen reflecting in their eyes. They spoke quickly, their words too low for me to catch. The instant I pushed the door open, they both flinched. Ethan snapped the laptop shut so fast, the lid echoed against the desk. Madeline's smile was strained. Her cheeks flushed. She rose from the chair with a casualness that felt rehearsed. Ethan cleared his throat and leaned back as if nothing had happened. He said he was showing her some investment opportunities, that she had asked for advice about her future. His voice was smooth, practiced. The same tone he had used with investors years ago when selling them on risks that looked like guarantees. I nodded, pretending to accept the explanation, but the tension in the room clung to me like humidity. Madeline slipped past me with a glance that was quick yet telling. Ethan gave me a look that was meant to be reassuring. But in the silence between us, I caught something else. It was a flicker, a silent message, exchanged in the brief meeting of their eyes before she left the room. It was not the look of a brother-in-law and a sister-in-law. It was the look of co-conspirators. That night in bed, Ethan wrapped an arm around me, his body warm against mine, but I lay rigid, my mind racing. Every instinct told me something was wrong. Yet every rational thought begged me not to jump to conclusions. I had built my entire life on logic, on code that followed patterns, on data that could be verified. But human hearts, I realized, did not run on algorithms. They ran on impulses, on secrets, on desires hidden behind practiced smiles. Over the next weeks, the distance grew. Ethan's trips multiplied, and Madeline's visits overlapped perfectly with his absences and returns. They spoke in shorthand, inside jokes that excluded me. Once I walked into the living room to find her perched on the arm of his chair, laughing at something on his phone. They jumped apart as if I had caught them in an embrace, and though no touch lingered, the air between them was thick with something I could not define. I tried to confront him once over breakfast. The ocean glimmered through the glass walls as I asked if everything was all right. If there was something he wanted to tell me, he sipped his coffee slowly, his expression unreadable, and said I was imagining things. That stress from the company's transition was getting to me. He leaned over and kissed my temple. The gesture tender on the surface, but I felt nothing underneath. The words replayed in my mind like a corrupted file. I was imagining things. I was stressed. Maybe I was. Or maybe he was rewriting the truth before my eyes, hoping I would doubt my own instincts. One night I caught Madeline watching me as I set the diamond ring on my nightstand before bed. Her gaze was sharp, not admiring but calculating. She noticed I saw her, and in response she smiled. The same half-smile she had worn at the wedding. The memory of her whisper came back in a rush. The promise to die for a thing like this. And in that moment, as the lamplight caught the stone and lit her eyes with a hungry gleam, I felt the first cold wave of fear that the cracks in my marriage were not simply about distance or secrets. They were the first tremors of something far more dangerous. I could not silence the gnawing suspicion that had rooted itself in my chest. Every look between Ethan and Madeline, every hushed conversation behind closed doors, every sudden silence when I entered a room weighed on me until I felt suffocated. Logic had always been my refuge, but logic told me that something was wrong, and I needed facts to prove it. That was when I decided to call Ryan Cole. Ryan was 47. A former police detective turned private investigator with a reputation for discretion. I had his number through a colleague who had once used him for a corporate background check. I met him at a small diner off the Pacific Coast Highway. The kind of place where no one looked twice at two strangers talking quietly over coffee. He was blunt from the start. If you want me to dig into your husband and your sister, you need to be prepared for what I might find. I told him I was prepared. The truth was, I was terrified. But the fear of not knowing was worse. Over the next 2 weeks, Ryan sent me updates that chilled me. He uncovered Ethan's financial history before we met. Ethan had been on the brink of bankruptcy, drowning in gambling debts and risky investments. He had taken out high-interest loans that mysteriously disappeared soon after we married. It was as if my fortune had washed away years of recklessness, buying him a clean slate. But the darker part was not the money. Ryan showed me reports of 2 women Ethan had dated in the past. Both wealthy. Both dead in what were ruled accidents. One drowned during a boating trip off Miami. The other fell from a balcony in Las Vegas. In both cases, Ethan had been the last person to see them alive. There had never been enough evidence for charges, but the pattern was undeniable. When I read those lines, my stomach twisted. The man I had let into my life, the man I had married, might have been perfecting his methods long before me. Ryan did not stop there. He pulled Madeline's records too. She was buried under credit card debt across multiple banks. Yet in the past 3 months, she had been depositing large amounts of cash into an offshore account in the Cayman Islands. Over $200,000 in total. Ryan traced the deposits, but could not identify the source. He told me that kind of money did not come from odd modeling jobs or family loans. Someone was paying her. And it was not me. I sat in my car after reading his report, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. The betrayal stung sharper than anything I had felt before. I had sent Madeline money countless times, believing I was helping her survive. Instead, she was building a secret fund, and I had no doubt Ethan was connected. Still, suspicion was not proof. Ryan reminded me of that when we met again in his office in downtown Los Angeles. He leaned back in his chair, his voice low and steady. "You need to be careful, Caroline. What I have is enough to know they are hiding things, but it is not enough to take to the police. Not yet." I nodded, though my heart sank. Proof was what I needed. Proof that would hold up against Ethan's polished charm and Madeline's innocent act. Without it, I would sound paranoid. A wife imagining betrayal where none existed. Ryan promised to keep digging. 3 days later, he called me with a new lead. "Meet me tomorrow. You need to see this in person." We met again at the diner. He slid a manila envelope across the table. Inside were photos. Grainy but clear enough. Ethan walking out of a high-rise in New York City. At his side was a man Ryan identified as a broker known in underground markets for arranging sales of rare gems and artifacts. They shook hands, their expressions tight and businesslike. I stared at the photos, the blood rushing in my ears. Ethan was not just hiding financial troubles. He was making moves to sell something worth billions. Ryan's eyes met mine. "He is not talking to this man about stocks or venture deals. This is about your diamond. The registry makes it difficult to sell legally, but on the black market, the Solara stone would fetch nearly anything." My hand trembled as I placed the photos back in the envelope. The whispers, the secret smiles, the questions Madeline had asked me about the ring's insurance and registry, all aligned into one horrifying truth. They were not simply betraying me emotionally. They were plotting around the very object that symbolized my marriage. As I left the diner that afternoon, clutching the envelope, I felt the ground beneath me shift. The cracks in my marriage were no longer cracks. They were fault lines, and the tremors were building towards something catastrophic. I drove home with my mind spinning, the envelope on the passenger seat like it carried a live charge. Every red light felt too long. Every moment behind the wheel a blur of headlights and intrusive thoughts. I had spent my entire adult life trusting data, proof, and logic. Yet here I was clinging to an investigator's photographs, feeling like my whole marriage had just been revealed for what it truly was. By the time I pulled into the driveway, the Pacific was already swallowing the sun, painting the water blood red, and I could not shake the sense that I was watching my own life disappear into the horizon. That night I barely slept. Ethan lay beside me, his chest rising and falling in steady rhythm, while my body remained stiff on the edge of the mattress. I thought about the women Ryan had uncovered, the accidents, the unexplained tragedies, the money that vanished and reappeared in offshore accounts. I thought about Madeline, her words at my wedding, her smile when she stared at the diamond. The puzzle pieces were no longer scattered. They were snapping together into an image too dark to deny. I knew I needed more. If I confronted Ethan now, he would deny everything. If I accused Madeline, she would run straight to him, and whatever they were planning would happen sooner. I had to outsmart them, the way I had once outsmarted skeptical investors who told me a young woman with no business experience could never build a company worth anything. I would collect my own data, my own evidence, until their lies collapsed under the weight of the truth. The plan came to me the next morning as I stared at my reflection in the bathroom mirror. The diamond flashing against the glass. If the ring was the center of their obsession, then it would also be the center of their mistake. I called Ryan later that day and told him what I wanted. A hidden camera, small enough to escape notice, disguised in something they would never suspect. He raised an eyebrow but didn't argue. 2 days later, he delivered a velvet jewelry box, identical to the one I already used for the Solara stone. But this one had been fitted with a pinhole camera and a tiny microphone sensitive enough to catch whispers. He showed me how to access the feed remotely, secured by encryption that even Ethan with his network of contacts could not break. That evening, when Ethan and Madeline left together claiming they had a late dinner in Laguna Beach, I opened my armoire and switched the boxes. The ring went back inside. The camera aimed directly at the place where I knew greedy hands would reach. My heart pounded as I closed the drawer, as if I had just sealed my fate along with the diamond. The next morning, I told Ethan I had to leave for a series of meetings in San Francisco with TechSphere executives. His eyes flickered for a moment. Suspicion or relief, I could not tell. But then he kissed my cheek and said he was proud of me. I rolled my suitcase to the car, waved, and drove off. Instead of the airport, I checked into a hotel a few miles away, opened my laptop, and waited for the feed to light up. For hours, nothing happened. I watched static images of an empty bedroom, listened to silence, and wondered if my paranoia had gone too far. By mid-afternoon, I had nearly convinced myself I would see nothing when the drawer slid open. Madeline's hand appeared first. Slender fingers tipped with pale pink polish, she lifted the ring slowly, holding it close to her face. The camera captured the glint in her eyes as she whispered to herself, "It is worth more than everything she has ever built." Ethan's voice drifted from the background. "Careful. Put it back before she notices." Madeline laughed, low and amused. "She notices everything. But it won't matter soon." Ethan stepped into the frame, his suit jacket draped casually over a chair. He sat on the edge of the bed, elbows resting on his knees. $1 billion, he said. "That's what Dubai is offering. The transfer will be immediate once the stone is authenticated." Madeline twirled the diamond between her fingers, the light scattering across the walls. Then she slid it back into the box and snapped it shut, her expression turning cold. "She won't be around to stop us." The air seemed to vanish from my lungs. Ethan leaned closer, his voice calm and deliberate. "The yacht is perfect. Out on the open water. No cameras. No witnesses. She'll fall from the deck and never surface. Everyone will call it a tragic accident." Madeline's gaze hardened, her tone as sharp as glass. "I want to be the one who takes it from her. I'll slip it off her finger, push her over, and that will be the end of Caroline." I froze in the hotel room, my body locked in place. I could hear the hum of traffic outside, the faint buzz of the air conditioning. But all of it seemed distant, irrelevant. My husband and my sister, plotting in my bedroom, speaking casually about my death as if they were discussing a weekend trip. They lingered on the screen for several more minutes, reviewing details. Madeline suggested telling the crew to stay below deck. Ethan explained how quickly the Coast Guard would abandon a search if there were no leads. Their words were practical, precise, like seasoned criminals perfecting a script. When they finally left the room, the feed went silent. But my world was louder than it had ever been. I closed the laptop slowly, my hands trembling, and stared at my reflection in the black screen. The face that looked back at me was pale, drawn, but not broken. The betrayal was too deep to measure. But beneath the despair, something else began to take root. I walked to the hotel window and pushed the curtain aside. The ocean shimmered under the afternoon sun, vast and eternal. That was where they wanted to end me, where they thought my body would vanish, and my fortune with it. I pressed my palm against the glass and whispered to myself words I had once used to get through the darkest days of building Neuropulse. Survive first, then win. The choice was clear now. I could not run. I could not confront them head-on without more leverage. They thought they had written the final chapter of my story. But I had just begun to write my own. I turned from the window, sat down on the bed, and began to plan. 2 days after Ryan's evidence left me shaken, Ethan came home with an idea that chilled me to the bone. He stood in the kitchen, wineglass in hand, his smile warm and practiced as always. He told me he had arranged something special, a second honeymoon just for us. A yacht trip from San Diego down the Baja coast. The Azure Dream, he called it. An 80-foot vessel with private crew and every luxury. Before I could answer, he added that Madeline would be joining us. He claimed she needed a break, that it would be good to spend time as a family. I forced a smile, nodding as if I were touched by the thought. Inside my chest, my heart pounded so hard, I thought he would hear it echo against the marble counter. It was happening. The plan I had overheard through my hidden camera was no longer hypothetical. They were setting the stage. I told him it sounded wonderful. I kissed him lightly on the cheek and excused myself, claiming I had calls to make. Behind the locked door of my office, I stared at the ring on my finger and whispered a vow to myself. If they thought this yacht would be my coffin, they were wrong. The next morning I began preparing quietly. I visited a survival gear shop in Los Angeles under the guise of shopping for a corporate team-building event. There, I purchased a GPS beacon no larger than a deck of cards, designed for offshore emergencies. It had a strobe light and a distress signal that could be picked up by aircraft or ships. I paid in cash. Through another contact, Ryan recommended. I obtained a satellite phone. It was clunky but reliable, able to cut through the black water of the Pacific where cell towers could not reach. I hid it in a waterproof pouch that could be strapped to my body. Alongside it, I packed a thin, inflatable life vest, one designed to look like a belt. Until activated, I kept everything secret, concealed in a small black duffel at the back of my closet. Each night while Ethan and Madeline chatted in the living room or watched television together, I reviewed my checklist over and over, making sure nothing was missing. I told myself the preparation was not paranoia. It was survival. Janet Lee, my loyal assistant who had been with me since the early days of Neuropulse, was the only person I trusted with a piece of the truth. I called her into my office late one evening after Ethan left for another suspicious meeting. I handed her a sealed envelope, heavy with documents and instructions. Janet frowned, sensing the gravity of the moment. What is this? Caroline, if you don't hear from me for 3 days, open it, I said. If you do hear from me, destroy it. Her eyes widened. Caroline, what is going on? I touched her hand gently, forcing calm into my voice. I can't explain right now. Just promise me you'll follow what's inside if I go silent. She hesitated, then nodded, her face pale. You know you can trust me. I squeezed her hand, grateful for her steadiness. Without her, I would have felt like I was drifting alone into darkness. The week leading up to the trip was suffocating. Ethan was more affectionate than he had been in months. As if rehearsing for the role of a devoted husband, he brought me breakfast in bed, arranged flowers in the foyer, and told me he could not wait to spend uninterrupted days with me at sea. Madeline, meanwhile, flitted around the house like a shadow, her laughter a little too bright, her movements a little too rehearsed. I watched them closely, masking my revulsion with polite smiles. When the morning of departure arrived, I dressed carefully, packing light but purposeful. I slipped the GPS beacon, satellite phone, and inflatable vest into my duffel beneath a cover of books and scarves. Ethan carried his leather suitcase to the car, whistling, as if this were just another vacation. Madeline appeared in oversized sunglasses and a silk scarf, tossing her bag into the trunk with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. The drive to San Diego felt endless. The closer we came to the marina, the tighter the knot in my stomach grew. The smell of salt water reached me before the ocean came into view, and my throat constricted. The Azure Dream gleamed at the dock, pristine and magnificent. Its white hull caught the sunlight, throwing back a brilliance that drew stares from passers-by. Crew members in Navy uniforms bustled around, preparing lines and supplies. On any other day, On any other trip, I would have been dazzled. Now all I could see was the stage for my intended death. As we stepped onto the deck, Ethan's hand pressed warmly against my back. Madeline walked ahead of us, turning to smile as the sea breeze lifted her hair. The crew greeted us with practiced cheer, unaware that they were escorting me into what Ethan and Madeline believed would be my grave. I set my bag down in the stateroom, assigned to me and Ethan. My fingers brushing the hidden compartments where my lifelines waited, I inhaled slowly, filling my lungs with the sharp scent of the ocean. This was it. The performance was beginning. Every wave that lapped against the hull whispered of danger. Every creak of the ropes reminded me that they thought I would never leave this yacht alive. And as I stepped back onto the deck, the sunlight glaring off the endless water, I felt the weight of certainty. The Azure Dream was not just a vessel, it was the theater they had chosen for my final act. But what they did not know was that I was already preparing to rewrite the ending. The first days aboard the Azure Dream were a performance staged with perfection. The yacht gleamed like a palace on water, with polished teak decks, white leather lounges, and a dining room where every meal looked stolen from the pages of a magazine. The chef presented towers of seafood, plates of tender steak, and desserts so delicate they seemed untouchable. Ethan played the role of the attentive husband, pouring my wine, laughing at my jokes, brushing my hand at the table. Madeline dressed like a movie star, her hair styled flawlessly each morning, her sunglasses never hiding the sly satisfaction in her eyes. To anyone watching, we looked like a trio wrapped in harmony. But beneath the smiles and clinking glasses, the truth lay raw. I saw the way Ethan's gaze lingered on Madeline a little too long when he thought I wasn't looking. I saw the way her laugh fell too easily at his remarks, as though rehearsed for his approval. At night, when the yacht rocked gently under the moonlight, I lay awake listening to the muffled cadence of their footsteps in the corridor, their voices dipping when they passed near my cabin. By the fourth night, the air felt heavy with anticipation. As though the yacht itself knew what was coming, the crew had been dismissed to their quarters early, a suggestion Ethan insisted would give them rest after long days of service. The three of us sat on the upper deck, the Pacific stretching into endless darkness around us. A warm breeze carried the scent of salt and diesel, mingling with the sweetness of the cocktails Ethan prepared. He handed me a tall glass rimmed with sugar, the liquid inside a vivid shade of coral. His eyes met mine with practiced tenderness. "For you, sweetheart, I made it extra strong. Just the way you like it." I took the glass, feeling its chill against my palm. I lifted it slowly, letting the condensation slide down my fingers. I tipped it toward my lips. But as Ethan turned to hand Madeline her drink, I tilted the glass just enough for the liquid to spill over the edge, seeping silently into the cushions beneath me. I let a trace touch my tongue, bitter with chemicals hidden under the sweetness of fruit. "Delicious," I murmured, my voice steady. Ethan smiled, satisfied, and settled back with his own glass. We sat in a fragile silence, the stars scattered overhead like broken glass. I let the minutes stretch, then let my body slacken, my head tilt as though heavy with exhaustion. I slurred a few words, feigned the stumble of someone overcome by alcohol. The deck beneath me felt cool as I let myself collapse against the chair. Ethan rose immediately, his mask of concern painted with precision. He touched my shoulder, whispered my name, checked the pulse in my wrist. I forced my eyes half closed, my breath shallow, my body limp. "She's out," he said, his voice calm and certain. Madeline appeared at his side, her perfume sharp in the night air. "Good," she replied softly. "Let's finish this." I felt her hands at my fingers, tugging. The ring resisted for a moment, snug against my skin, and she twisted harder, her nails scraping me until it slid free. She held it up in the moonlight, the Solara stone blazing even against the darkness, her smile cruel and triumphant. Leaning close, so close I felt her breath against my ear, she whispered, words that sliced through me like a blade. "Say hello to the sharks. Ethan's grip tightened on my arms. Together they lifted me. Their movements practiced. Efficient. The sound of waves slapped against the hull. The smell of salt thick as they dragged me toward the railing. My heart thundered in my chest. But I kept my body slack, my face still. "Now," Ethan said, his voice low. And in one violent motion they heaved me over. The world spun, the railing flashing past, the stars wheeling overhead. For a single heartbeat I saw their faces, his twisted in cold focus, hers lit with exhilaration, the diamond clutched in her hand. Then the water rose up black and merciless. The impact was brutal. Like striking concrete, the ocean swallowed me whole, choking my mouth and nose with salt, dragging me under into suffocating darkness. The roar of the yacht's engines thundered above, fading as I sank. I kicked hard, forcing my body upward, lungs burning, mind repeating a single command: survive. The surface broke around me. The night, vast and endless. The yacht's lights shimmered 100 yards away, already pulling farther into the void. I treaded water, gasping for air, clutching the pouch hidden under my clothes, the only lifeline between me and the oblivion they had chosen for me. Above, the stars blazed indifferent. Around me, the ocean stretched cold and infinite. And in the silence left behind, I realized they believed I was gone. The fall had torn the air from my lungs. 20 feet of freefall ended in an impact so violent I thought my spine had snapped. The Pacific swallowed me whole, its cold grip shocking every nerve. Salt water rushed into my nose and mouth, burning my throat as I fought not to choke. For a moment I flailed blindly in the darkness, the weight of my clothes dragging me deeper. Instinct took over. I kicked with everything I had, arms clawing upward through the suffocating black. My chest screamed for air. But finally the surface broke, and I erupted into the night. Gasping, coughing, spitting salt. The world around me was empty. Behind me the yacht's lights grew smaller, the engines drumming against the water as the azure dream sped farther away. My cries for help were swallowed by the roar, meaningless against the distance. I forced myself to turn in a circle, scanning the horizon. Nothing but endless water, a cold moon, and stars indifferent to my suffering. My body shook violently, not just from fear, but from the shock of the temperature. I treaded water and fumbled for the pouch strapped beneath my shirt. My fingers were numb but managed to pull free the GPS beacon. I pressed the switch. A faint light blinked, the only sign that a signal might be cutting through the vast emptiness. The ocean pushed me back and forth, waves lifting me high, then slamming me down. My muscles burned, my arms already heavy. Hours stretched in fragments of pain and determination. I whispered to myself the words my survival instructor had once said: one more breath, one more kick, one more moment. At some point in the night, I collided with something floating, a cushion, torn loose from the yacht in the struggle. I clung to it desperately, letting my exhausted legs rest while the foam kept me just above the surface. My teeth chattered uncontrollably. Every few minutes I checked the beacon, watching the faint blink like it was the heartbeat of my will to live. The hours blurred together. 12 at least, maybe more. The night sky faded into a pale gray. Then streaks of pink spread across the horizon. My lips were cracked, my body numb to the core. Twice I drifted toward unconsciousness, my eyes closing, my grip slipping from the cushion. But each time I forced myself back, reminded of what waited if I gave up. Ethan's smile, Madeline's whisper. No, I would not die for them. When the first rays of dawn stretched over the ocean, I thought I was hallucinating. A low hum reached me, faint at first, then growing louder. I lifted my head, straining my ears. There it was again, the steady rhythm of an engine. I turned, blinking salt from my eyes. A small fishing boat bobbed in the distance, its white hull catching the light. I waved the cushion wildly, my throat tearing as I screamed. Over here, Please. Over here. For a moment, the boat continued on its path. Indifferent as the stars had been, desperation clawed through me. With shaking hands, I activated the strobe on the beacon, a pulsing white light that cut across the rising sun. The boat slowed. I saw figures now. 2 of them. One older. 1 younger. They pointed. Shouted something I could not hear. Then, the vessel turned, cutting across the waves toward me. Relief flooded my body so strongly, I nearly let go of the cushion. I forced myself to cling tighter as the fishing boat drew near, the sound of its motor filling the silence that had threatened to consume me all night. A weathered man with deep lines across his face leaned over the side, speaking rapid Spanish, his voice full of disbelief. Beside him, a boy, no older than 20, reached out with a pole. "Grab on," he called in broken English. I summoned the last strength in me, reached, and caught hold. Strong arms hauled me from the water, my body collapsing onto the wooden deck. I coughed violently, salt water spilling onto the boards, my chest heaving. The older man knelt beside me, wrapping a rough wool blanket around my shoulders. His son pressed a bottle of water into my trembling hands. The man's eyes searched mine, cautious but kind. "Señora," he asked, his accent thick but clear. "Where is your boat?" I tried to answer, but my throat was raw. My voice, a broken whisper. "Gone." They left me. Father and son exchanged glances, suspicion and compassion battling in their eyes. They did not press me for details. "Not yet." The older man only nodded firmly. "Rest. Safe now. We take you to shore." I lay back against the deck, the smell of fish and diesel mixing with the salt in my hair. The waves rocked the small boat gently, so different from the violent ocean that had nearly claimed me. Above me, the sun climbed higher, warm on my frozen skin. I closed my eyes, the blanket pulled tight around me, and for the first time in hours, I allowed myself to believe that I might survive. Luis steered the boat toward the coastline, and the younger man, Marco, kept glancing at me, as if I might disappear again if he looked away. When the boat finally docked at a small fishing harbor in Ensenada, I could barely stand. They helped me off the deck and into a modest inn near the market. The walls were painted a fading yellow, the bed stiff, but it was shelter. And for now, that was more than enough. I gave the innkeeper a false name, Patricia Lane, one I had prepared months ago in a moment of paranoia. Luis accepted it without question, but I saw the flicker of doubt in his eyes. He did not ask for my true story, and I did not offer it. The less he knew, the safer he and his son would be. Over the next 2 days, they brought me food and checked in often. Marco left fruit and bottles of water by my door, sometimes adding small kindnesses, like aspirin or a clean shirt. Each time I thanked him. His shy smile reminded me of a life untainted by greed. Luis sat with me one evening and spoke quietly. "You carry heavy things, Señora," he said in Spanish. "Whatever they are, God gave you another chance. Do not waste it." That night I lay awake, listening to the sound of the waves against the shore. My body still ached, but my mind was sharper than it had been in months. They believed I was dead. That gave me the only advantage left. When I turned on the small television in the corner of the room, the confirmation came. My name filled the screen. Photographs of me smiling at charity events and technology conferences. The headline at the bottom read, "American Tech Heiress Lost at Sea." I watched Ethan deliver a press conference in San Diego. His voice cracked as he described waking to find me gone. He dabbed his eyes with a handkerchief, his shoulders shaking. Beside him, Madeline leaned against the podium, her face pale, her mascara smudged as though she had been crying for hours. "Prayers for Caroline," she said softly into the microphone. My sister was everything to me. The reporters lapped it up, but I could see the act for what it was. I knew those tears. I had seen her smile when she pulled the ring from my finger. Social media exploded. Thousands of comments poured in, condolences mixed with questions. Some asked why Madeline, who had been traveling with us, had not tried harder to save me. Others wondered why she had chosen to accompany a married couple on what should have been a private trip. The speculation grew darker with each hour. She became a target for suspicion, though she masked it well. Ethan, however, basked in the attention of a grieving widower, using the moment to polish his image, watching from the tiny television. My fury simmered. 3 days passed. I had left strict instructions with Janet before the yacht trip. If I went silent for that long, she was to open the envelope I gave her. She did. Late that night, I logged into the emergency email I had created. There was a message waiting from her. Coded but unmistakable. Caroline, if you are reading this, I know the truth now. I will wait for your instructions. You are not alone. Tears welled in my eyes. But they were tears of relief this time. Janet had always been loyal. And now she was the first thread of the net I would weave around Ethan and Madeline. I told her to connect me with Olivia Tran, a young cybersecurity specialist I had once mentored during my company's early years. Olivia was 27 now, brilliant and fearless, with a reputation for finding what others believed erased. Through encrypted calls, she spoke with me from her apartment in Austin. Her voice carried excitement beneath the caution. I have been monitoring Ethan's accounts, she said. He is sloppy. Too confident. He sent emails to a broker in Dubai, attaching details of the Solara stone. He even negotiated payment schedules. My breath caught. Can you recover them already done? She replied, sending me files through the secure channel. Deleted messages. Drafts. Even attachments with the diamond's registry number, enough to tie him to smuggling attempts on the international market. I opened the files on the old laptop Louise had lent me. Ethan's words glared back, his arrogance immortalized in text. The Solara stone is free of insurance claims. He wrote in one. Buyer assumes possession within 7 days. There it was. The proof that what I had feared was real. Not just betrayal. Not just attempted murder. But a conspiracy to sell one of the rarest diamonds in the world through black channels. The walls of the inn seemed to close in, as I read line after line. My survival had not just given me another chance at life. It had handed me the keys to their downfall. Outside, the fishermen returned from sea, their voices carrying in the night. Inside, I closed the laptop slowly, the reflection of my own eyes staring back at me from the dark screen. They thought I was gone, but I was only just beginning. 3 months passed before I set foot again on American soil. By then, Ethan and Madeline had exhausted their little honeymoon of excess, parading through Europe with my money and my diamond, smiling for cameras as if grief had already been washed away by champagne and silk. They returned to Newport Beach in the early fall. Just as the ocean winds carried the first chill of the season, the house that had once been mine stood waiting, its glass walls glowing against the evening sky. I arrived hours before them, slipping in through the service entrance. Ethan had never bothered to update the biometric lock I had installed years ago, arrogant enough to believe the dead would never return. My fingerprint was still recognized instantly. The soft click of the door opening into silence. The mansion smelled faintly of dust and expensive candles. My footsteps echoed across marble floors I had once chosen myself, now littered with Madeline's tasteless touches. Gold-framed mirrors hung where my art had been. A cheap perfume clung to the air. I walked through the rooms methodically, my heart steady, my hands certain. In the dining room I found what I needed. I laid a white linen cloth across the long mahogany table. 3 place settings gleamed under the chandelier. Crystal glasses filled with wine I had poured myself. And at the center I placed the box, small, velvet, and ominous. It looked delicate, almost inviting. But inside lay everything I had collected during those months abroad. When the preparations were finished, I stood in the hallway, watching the monitors on my tablet. Outside, headlights cut across the driveway as the black SUV rolled to a stop. Luggage clattered against the pavement. Their laughter carried faintly through the night as they stumbled toward the door. Drunk on indulgence and convinced of their triumph, the lock turned. Ethan stepped in first, his tan still fresh from Italy. His shirt open at the collar, Madeline followed, wrapped in a silk scarf. Her heels clicking across the tile. They froze almost immediately. The lights in the foyer had been turned on. Jazz music drifted softly from the speakers. Ethan's head tilted, his expression sharpening. "Did you leave the lights on?" he muttered. Madeline shook her head, her hand tightening on his arm. Her voice dropped to a whisper. "Ethan, something is wrong." They moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps growing louder as they neared the dining room. I stepped out from the shadows before they reached the doorway. My hair had returned to its natural brown, cut neatly to frame a face hardened by survival. I wore simple black, nothing like the bright silks and diamonds they favored. "Welcome home," I said, my voice steady. "Cold. I have a gift for you both." Madeline's scream tore through the room. Her hands flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with terror. She stumbled back against the wall, shaking her head violently. "No. No. It is not possible. You are dead. You drowned." Ethan went pale, though his composure lasted longer than hers. He blinked once, twice, as though trying to force the image of me into something rational. Finally, his jaw clenched, his mask of grief slipping just enough to show the predator underneath. "You," he said softly. How I did not answer immediately. I let the silence stretch, until the only sounds were the soft clink of wine glasses on the table and Madeline's uneven breathing. Then I gestured toward the box at the center of the table. "Why don't you open it and see?" Madeline shook her head frantically, refusing to move closer. Ethan, however, stepped forward, suspicion written across his face. His hand hesitated over the velvet lid before he lifted it slowly. Inside lay the damning collection, a flash drive containing emails and texts Olivia had restored. Ethan's negotiations with brokers in Dubai, laid bare in black and white. Bank statements from Madeline's offshore account. Deposits that had no explanation except blood money. And tucked alongside them, the gleaming Solara stone itself, resting on a cushion of black silk, recovered from where they thought they had hidden it safely. Ethan's face drained of color, his fingers trembled as he lifted the drive, scanned the documents, then dropped them back as though they burned his skin. I took a step closer, my voice sharp and deliberate. "Every word you wrote, every deal you made, every lie you spoke is here. The diamond you thought you stole is back where it belongs." Madeline sobbed, shaking so hard the scarf slipped from her shoulders. "This cannot be real. You cannot be standing here. We watched you fall." I looked at her directly, unblinking. "You watched me fall. You assumed I'd drowned. That was your mistake." The chandelier light glinted across the diamond, casting fractured sparks across their faces. Ethan's mask cracked fully then, his fury breaking through the calm. He slammed the lid of the box shut, his voice low and venomous. "This is not over." But it already was. I stood in the center of my home, alive and stronger than they could ever have imagined, while the people who betrayed me trembled before the evidence of their own downfall. And in their eyes I saw the truth at last. Fear. Ethan's lips curled into a tight smile, the kind that used to charm investors but now only revealed desperation. "Caroline, you do not understand. It was never supposed to happen this way. You slipped. It was an accident." His voice quivered with just enough practiced grief to almost sound believable to anyone who did not know the truth. I stepped closer to the table, my eyes fixed on him. "Do not lie to me in my own house. If it was an accident, then why do I have your emails to a broker in Dubai, promising delivery of the Solara stone?" Within 7 days, Madeline gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. She looked at Ethan with panic, as if he had promised her those secrets would never see the light of day. Ethan's jaw tightened, his calm mask faltering. "Open the box," I ordered. His hesitation lasted only a second before pride forced him forward. He flipped the lid, and the room lit with the fire of the diamond. The Solaris stone sat gleaming against black silk. The USB drive beside it like a dagger, waiting to be unsheathed. Madeline staggered back, as if the sight itself could wound her. No! No! That cannot be here. We hit it. I folded my arms. Steady. Unblinking. You thought you hit it, but you underestimated me. Ethan snatched the drive with shaking hands. Trying to maintain control, he shoved it into the laptop I had already set on the table. The screen came alive with a folder titled in simple letters, Evidence. He clicked. And their own voices spilled into the room. The recording played clear. Ethan's measured tone. Madeline's sharp whispers. The yacht. The drugs. The plan to throw me overboard. I want to be the one who takes it from her. Madeline's voice hissed from the speakers. I want to be the one who ends her. Hennis Boglil. Her eyes wide with horror, as if hearing herself for the first time. She pressed her hands to her ears. That is not me. That cannot be me. I leaned forward. My voice cold. It is you, Madeline. I remember the moment perfectly. When you pulled the ring from my hand and leaned down to whisper, "Say hello to the sharks." Her face crumpled, tears spilling freely. But I felt no pity. Ethan slammed the laptop shut, his breath ragged. This proves nothing. Words twisted, taken out of context. Then I tapped the box once more. The emails. Ethan. Shall I read them out loud? I pulled out a printed copy. The ink sharp against the paper. Buyer confirms funds. Delivery to be arranged discreetly. You wrote these. You signed them. For the first time, true rage overtook his fear. His hand darted to the table where a steak knife lay among the broken crystal. In one fluid motion, he gripped it and lunged at me. Eyes wild. If I am going down, then you are going with me. The knife glinted under the chandelier as it slashed through the air. I braced for impact. But before it could reach me, the front doors burst open. Boots thundered against marble. Shouts filled the room. Federal agents. Do not move. Ryan Cole was first through the door. His hand catching Ethan's wrist in midair, twisting with brutal precision. The knife clattered to the ground, spinning across the floor. Ethan roared, fighting, spitting curses as Ryan forced him down. 2 FBI agents closed in, weapon drawn, pinning him to the ground while he writhed like a rabid animal. Madeline screamed, backing against the wall, tears streaking her cheeks. She lifted her hands, trembling. Please. I did not want this. He made me. It was all him. I turned to her slowly, my expression calm, though my chest burned with the memory of saltwater lungs. Do not dare rewrite history now. I remember your hands pulling at the ring, your breath against my ear. You chose this. Madeline. Her sobs grew louder, her words breaking apart. I was jealous. I wanted to be free of your shadow, but he made me believe. My voice did not waver. No one made you lean over me and whisper those words. That was all you. Agent Lawson, a tall woman with sharp eyes, strode forward. Both suspects are under arrest, she declared, her tone leaving no room for argument. Ethan Marshall. Madeline Hayes. You are charged with attempted murder, conspiracy, and international smuggling. Cold steel snapped shut around Ethan's wrists as he continued to thrash. You will regret this. He spat, his voice guttural. You think you have won, but you are nothing without me. Ryan hauled him upright, ignoring his resistance. Ethan's face twisted with fury, but I only saw the hollow man he truly was, stripped of charm and power. 2 other agents moved to cuff Madeline. She offered no fight, only collapsed into their arms, her body limp, her cries pitiful. As they read her rights, she lifted her gaze to me one last time, eyes wide with pleading. Please. Priscilla. Forgive me. I was your sister. I stepped closer, my voice dropping to a whisper only she and I could hear. You were the one who told me to say hello to the sharks. Now it is your turn to hear silence." Her face broke completely, her sobs echoing through the house as they led her out. When the doors closed behind them, the room fell quiet. The table still held the velvet box, the diamond burning under the light like a witness. Shattered glass sparkled across the floor, remnants of the life they had tried to take from me. Agent Lawson approached, her tone softer now. "Miss Hayes, we will need a formal statement. But not tonight. You have endured enough." I nodded, my legs steady, my hands finally free of shaking. I watched through the window as the agents pushed Ethan and Madeline into waiting cars. Their silhouettes shrank as the vehicles rolled down the drive. Swallowed by the night. The house was mine again, but it no longer felt like home. It felt like a crime scene, both of their making and my survival. Yet amid the wreckage, I knew one truth: justice had not just knocked on my door. It had walked in and claimed them. And for the first time since the cold water of the Pacific closed over me, I could breathe without the taste of salt and betrayal. The months that followed blurred into endless hearings, depositions, and courtrooms. But by the summer of 2024, the trial finally reached its conclusion. I sat in the Los Angeles Superior Court, my hands folded in my lap, watching the two people who had once been closest to me sit at the defense table in chains. Ethan wore the same tailored arrogance he had always carried, though prison had already begun to carve hard lines into his face. Madeline looked smaller, her glossy perfection stripped away, the dark circles under her eyes impossible to hide. The jury returned swiftly, their verdict sharp and final: guilty on all counts: attempted murder, conspiracy, international smuggling, theft of property valued at over $1 billion. The judge's gavel struck, and the courtroom seemed to exhale with me. Ethan was sentenced to 30 years without the possibility of parole. Madeline received 18 years, her tears falling as the sentence was read, though I could not tell if they were tears of regret or self-pity. I glanced across the aisle at my parents. Gloria and Robert sat stiffly, their expressions a mixture of shame and disbelief. For years they had protected Madeline, coddled her, excused her mistakes. Now they had no words, no defense. Their favorite child was branded a criminal before the world. I felt no satisfaction in their humiliation, only a weary acceptance that the truth had finally spoken louder than favoritism. When the judge asked if I wished to address the court, I rose. My voice carried through the quiet chamber. I survived what they intended to destroy. They took everything sacred: family, love, trust, and tried to turn it into currency. But greed has no lasting power. The real strength is in survival and rebuilding. The diamond was entered into evidence and later returned to me. When the prosecutor handed it over, the weight of it in my palm was heavier than ever before. It no longer shimmered as a symbol of love, but as a reminder of betrayal, blood, and ocean water. Keeping it hidden in a vault felt wrong. Selling it would only repeat the cycle of greed, so I made a choice. I contacted the Los Angeles County Museum of Art and arranged for the Solaris stone to be placed on permanent display. The unveiling drew reporters, historians, and families. I stood beside the glass case as the diamond caught the light. Dazzling but untouchable. This jewel nearly destroyed my life. I told the crowd, may it serve as a warning that nothing beautiful is worth more than integrity and trust. After that day, I redirected my energy into something greater than revenge. With the settlement money and my remaining fortune, I established the Phoenix Trust. Its mission was simple: to provide legal aid, counseling, and financial resources for women betrayed by family or partners. Women who found themselves trapped by manipulation and lies. The first time I met a survivor helped by the foundation, a young mother who had escaped an abusive marriage, I felt something I had not felt in years. Purpose. Her gratitude was quiet, but the strength in her eyes reminded me why I had lived when I should have died. Life slowly shifted into a rhythm again. I purchased a modest home overlooking the Pacific, nothing like the sprawling mansion that had become a stage for deceit. Its wide windows opened to the ocean. The same ocean that had tried to claim me, but now I faced it without fear. One evening I stood barefoot on the sand, the waves washing cool against my ankles. The horizon glowed with the setting sun, and I whispered to the sea. Greed destroyed them. Survival and rebuilding gave me strength. For a long while, I listened to the crash of water, each wave erasing the footprints behind me. The past would never vanish completely, but I no longer needed it. I had endured it, and I had risen from it. My story is not just mine. Many of you have faced betrayal, perhaps not on yachts or with diamonds, but in the quiet ways that cut just as deep. A broken promise, a stolen inheritance, a loved one's lies. What did you do to survive? How did you rebuild? Share your story with me. Because every voice adds to the strength of others still searching for theirs. If this journey moved you, stay with me here. Like this video. Subscribe for more stories of justice and resilience. And share this one with someone who needs to be reminded that survival is its own victory. Thank you for listening, for witnessing, and for proving that even from ashes, we can rise again.